All right, good morning, everybody. Just give me a thumbs up. Let me know you can hear me okay, please. All right. Thank you, Carla, Marley, Nancy. Thank you all. Um, so, as we get started here, just trying to decide what order I want to go in. I'll wait a little bit on one thing I wanted to share. Now I'll keep you all in suspense. Don't worry, it's nothing too exciting. But we'll go ahead and get started with the question, just to give some time for people to settle in. And before we start the meditation practice. So what question do I have for you? How about, I don't have any. So I'll turn it back on you. What questions do you have? Anything? Now I put you on the spot. If you're new, welcome. Thanks for joining us. There's a chat box somewhere on your screen there. And I always like to give a little bit of time for people to communicate and share some thoughts. So my question for you all this morning is, what are your questions? I'll go ahead and type that in here just so. What do you want to know? I'm so glad you asked that question, Marley, because that will play perfectly into what I was going to share. What are your questions? What do you want to know? So that's my question for you all. What are your questions and what do you want to know? That's a funny statement. What do you want to know? Because as I'm typing it, as I type, what do you want to know? It almost sounds as if like you're going to have some question and I'm going to have some answer, as if I have some great knowledge or wisdom or something to share with you, or that I have the answers. And I don't. It's one of the great things about being a practitioner, is that you are constantly reminded every day of your own greed, your own anger, and your own ignorance. And these will shine huge in a pandemic. Anytime we live in a period or a time where there's tremendous pain and suffering and trauma being inflicted upon us and those around the world, it really shines a light on our actions. Kind of that there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide type of thing, where you're just left with yourself and you're left with the questions of, am I greedy? Am I angry? Am I ignorant? And it's a really fun thing to explore, to really ask yourself, what are my actions? It's something good to ponder. So questions, what are your questions? What do you want to know? I was also looking for something here that I wanted to read. I'm not finding it at the moment. I know I saved it into a folder and it's not in the folder that I'm seeing it. Or that I thought I put it in. But I can kind of paraphrase it anyways. And something I received from the San Francisco Zen Center, which I thought was really beautiful. So I'll go ahead and I'll just start sharing that now as you're all pondering away at your deepest questions. So I received a newsletter from San Francisco Zen Center, and it was probably one of the most beautiful things I've received in regards to facing the pandemic and opening. Um, and again, I'm paraphrasing here. There were parts I was going to read to you, and I'll find it eventually and just maybe send parts of it out or even the whole thing. But even if you look at Marley's question, and Marley, we love you, so don't take any of this personally. But can you open Buddha for You soon? Um, Everybody wants us to open Buddha for You, and everybody wants us to open the Dharma Bum Temple, and we would love to open Buddha for You, and we would love to open the Dharma Bum Temple. But it's not smart and it's not safe yet. And the thing I loved so much about the uh, letter from San Francisco Zen Center, the newsletter, is that it came from a very beautiful place of like, look, we all know that you want to come back in, but what about us, right? What about the people? And this is again, I'm repeating myself, but I'm paraphrasing what they said, and I wish I could find it because they wrote it so eloquently. But one example is where they have their city center, where they have some residents there, and they said, look, what about us? What about all the staff members that we have lost? What about all of the financial struggles we have faced? What about all the resources we don't have anymore? What about the health and safety of those people who are here? And it was a very clear statement that says, look, we're not ready yet. And no matter how bad you miss coming into your favorite San Francisco Zen Center, what about us? What are we ready for? What are we prepared for? Where do we feel safe? You have to remember that all of these places that have closed, none of them want to close. They don't want to be closed. We didn't start a Dharma Bum temple 14 years ago to be closed for 14 months. But at the same time, again, using the San Francisco Zen Center's newsletter as an example, they were very clear on, look, we're just not ready yet. And I'm not saying that that's us. I'm not making any statements about what we are or are not doing. This is simply addressing the beauty of this newsletter, which was really calling out, I think, all the people that are just kind of pushing them to open, thinking like, well, numbers are down, so let's take off a mask and open up. And they're saying, what about us? What about the people that are suffering and that lead this community? What about their family, their friends, their individual ability to make themselves available for all these people that just want to show up? They have 3 locations. They have the city center, San Francisco Zen Center. They have the Tassajara, and they have Green Gulch. So they have 3 locations. They have I don't know, probably I'm sure, multi-million-dollar budget. They're a huge operation. And what they're saying to the community, the way I took it was, we're just not, again, I'm repeating myself, but we're just not ready for you yet. And we have to think very compassionately about the people that run that place. I know the head abbot and a lot of the people that are affiliated and work with San Francisco Zen Center, and they have family members that they've lost. They have friends that they have lost during the pandemic. They have been sick. They have watched everything unfold and be a part of all of this pandemic, just like you have. But just because somebody wants the Zen Center in San Francisco to open up doesn't mean that they just say, okay, great, let's open. Right? I just caution people on their own individual greed and selfishness as you're pushing and wanting people to just open. Please consider the individuals that are running the places that you want to see opened again. This is a huge topic within the Buddhist community. Everybody takes their own individual stance, their own views, their own path forward, as they should. Everyone's situation is very unique and very different. And again, my intention here is not even to talk about any plans of the Dharma Bum Temple, because the only plan I can tell you is we don't have one yet. We don't know. And when we know, I promise you'll know. But of all the things that I have seen of people saying, we're either open or we're closed, I could not have been more impressed with the letter that they sent out and how they addressed it and how they asked the community to please just have compassion for those who are struggling and suffering, trying to keep things afloat. Now you scale down the Dharma Bum Temple drastically to where we have, less than a handful of us that run this entire operation. So you can't really compare us to the San Francisco Zen Center. But if you think about all the programs and all the people and all the lives that we touch, that really sits in the hands of a couple people. And this year plus has been pretty heavy and traumatic for so many people that as soon as you open the doors, what do you think those handful of people are going to face? They're going to face the intensified trauma that everybody just has gone through. And so we need to make sure that the people who are there to hold the temple together, that they're ready for that. So I guess if anything, I'm just asking everybody from this talk to have compassion for not just the Buddhist places, all the religious places, all the businesses, everyone, all the small mom and pop type, businesses and companies out there that have struggled. And please remind yourself how difficult it's been for them as well. So so again, my intention this morning was to just share the letter from San Francisco Zen Center, or a part of it. But like I said, I paraphrased it, and I'll send it out when I find it. So, all right. So other questions here. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the most beneficial way to make tough decisions. That's easy. Just flip a coin. Brian, how to practice right effort in a late stage capitalist economy. Flip another coin. All right, so we're going to start with the meditation practice, and then Marisa and Brian, I will come back to your questions, and we'll go from there. So a couple things I'll tell you before we begin. Nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to float away. You won't have any mystical, magical experiences. Your mind won't shut off. Marisa, it's asking me if I should show or hide your comments. So I don't know what you said, but well, there you go. Your mind will not shut off. It won't stop racing. Don't judge your practice. Don't ask yourself, is this working or not working? Am I doing it right or wrong? We're just going to sit. We're going to breathe. Sounds, you'll hear them. Sounds inside the room, outside. This is life. Life is filled with chaos. And the practice of meditation is to learn to be quiet and still within all the chaos. So posture, you just want to be comfortable. If you're on a cushion, slide into the front third, pushing the stomach forward, allows the back to straighten. Shoulders are relaxed. Hands can be on the knees or in the lap. I will guide us as we begin, and we will settle into a little bit of silence. And most important, don't expect anything but to sit and breathe. And starting with the eyes closed if comfortable, or slightly open. Mouth open or closed. We'll start with taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And eventually, settle into a natural rhythm of the breath. Noticing the mind as it wanders, jumping from thought to thought. Start with gently guiding the attention, focus, to the stomach or chest. Breathing in, feel them rise. Breathing out, they fall. Simply continue this practice, observing sensation of breath. And as the mind wanders, lost in thought, recognize it, release that thought, return attention, focus to the breath. Breathing in, follow breath in, breathing out, follow breath out. Letting go of expectations. Letting go of judgments from the practice. Just sitting, breathing. Keeping the mind alert, aware of each sound. Each thought, each physical sensation. Yet concerned with nothing but sitting, breathing. And with the body still and rested, and the speech quiet, aware of all sounds, and the mind learning to settle. Know what it's like to just sit and breathe. Knowing with each breath, there's nothing else to do, nowhere else to go, no one else to be. Everything beautiful, exactly as it is. Sitting, breathing. Once again, taking 3 deep breaths slowly. And as you slowly open the eyes, slowly begin to move. And most important, with the practice of meditation, is to recognize how you feel now, immediately after. Compare this to how you typically feel throughout your day. Recognize the difference, if there is one. Ask yourselves how you prefer to feel every day for the rest of your life. Knowing however you feel now, if it's quiet, calm, and still, or a busy mind, racing mind, whatever you're sitting with. It's not from anything I said. It's not from how you sit and hold the hands across the legs. It's not from sounds around you or anything else for that matter. Simply your own mind and your own mind's reaction to an external condition. This is what the Buddha called pratitya samuppada, means dependent origination. This is the basis of the Buddha's awakening. The word Buddha simply means awakened. He was a human being no different than any one of us who began to understand why he suffered, why he got angry, sad, depressed, stressed, anxious. He began to recognize his greed, his anger, and his ignorance. And he left it. He made a choice to drastically change his life. To me, that's one of the greatest things about the Buddha's life that I think it's inspired me the most, is that early on, when I began to study Buddhism, I thought that there was some teaching out there, that there was something that was gonna like make me feel better. And so I continued living the way I was living initially, and just kept thinking, well, if I read one more book, if I go to one more class, if I do one more meditation, that all of a sudden now everything will become clear and suffering will cease to exist. And then somewhere along the way, I realized, well, let's look at the Buddha's life. Not as the enlightened one, as they called him, but the unenlightened one. He had a pretty luxurious life. And even for those of us who don't think we live a life of luxury, it's all relative, of course. But if you are able to sit here on a Saturday morning and dial up your computer or phone, connect to your Wi-Fi, have the time to just sit, drink your coffee, your tea, have a roof over your head, have a fridge filled with food, a closet filled with clothes. You might not think so, but you're living a pretty luxurious life. And that's really hard for us to wake up to, because no matter how many changes we think we've made in our lives, or I find for the longest time that I was just fooling myself. I was lying to myself and saying, well, I can still have all of this, but I go to a Buddhist temple and I meditate and I read these books, so then everything's okay. And what I had to learn was, it wasn't about having the things or not having the things. It was about the attachment, the craving, the desire to the things. This is, to me, the essence of the renunciate path, which doesn't have to be, and that's what my master taught, you don't need to be a monk or a nun to renounce. Renunciation is about renouncing your cravings, desires, attachments, the things that you have been so conditioned to think and feel are important. For me, it was the cars, or the places I lived, or the clothes I wore, or the places I went to, or the trips I went on, or the people I was around. Now, one might think that having those things is not necessarily greed, and I understand that to a certain extent, but you have to look at what is your intention behind those things. And for me, the attachment, the craving, the desire was, I thought and felt that I needed those things to be important or special or at peace. So for me, I had to renounce in my own way the craving, desire, attachment to these things and places and people. So coming back to my initial point, which is, you can't just meditate, go to your temple, and think everything's going to be fine. One of my favorite Einstein quotes is, you can't solve the world's problems with the same mind that created it. So if your life is, as I like to say, a hectic, stressed out mess, you need to make some major changes in how you live. And it's not always about just getting rid of stuff. I mean, you can go empty your closet and give away all your clothes, but that doesn't mean that you've actually cut through the craving and attachment to having all the stuff. Because if you're not careful, the stuff will just pile up again. So what I'm really getting at is the part of the Buddha's story in his life that inspires me the most isn't the 45 years he roamed around being called the Buddha, the awakened one, and the teachings. It's actually the courage and discipline and strength that he had to give up the life of luxury and to step into a life of the unknown without complaints, without drama. That's what inspires me most about his path. And for me, when I look at, heroes or people that I admire most in my life, that's why he's one of them. Again, not just because he's called the Buddha, the awakened one, and not because he taught for 45 years helping people, but because he had the courage to walk away from a life that was unpleasant. And he did it so he could figure out how to then share that with others. And that's what he taught. So just some thoughts for this morning. It's difficult not to recognize and see well, like I said earlier, when you're living through a pandemic, levels of greed, anger, and ignorance in self and others are just there's a light shining on it, and it's very easy to see that. So let's all continue to work on our own levels of greed, anger, and ignorance, and recognize that patience is really critical right now. So, all right, with that being said, I'll pause. I'd like to just open up to questions, meditation, Buddhist practice. Again, if you are joining us for the first time, well, welcome. There's a chat box on your screen, and I always prefer to respond to people's questions as opposed to rambling on my own. So let's see, Marisa. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the most beneficial way to make tough decisions. Yeah, I'm still a fan of the coin flip, but I won't do it here because it would require lots of typing. But my guess is, knowing you and your practice and how you've evolved and changed in your life, that if we were sitting at temple and you asked me that question, what I probably would do is I would throw it back to you and say, Marisa, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the most beneficial way to make tough decisions. And my guess is you would rattle off probably pretty close to what I'm about to say. But sometimes we just want to hear it from others. So if the coin flip idea doesn't work, for me, every decision is tough. Some more so than others because of the attachments that we have to people and places and things. But every decision we make in life is critical and is difficult because they have an impact. And when the impact is something or someone that we are deeply attached to, the decision in and of itself seems to be much greater or larger or more difficult, when in reality, the decisions are probably very simple without the attachment piece, right? It's easy for us to make decisions potentially about maybe a stranger or someone we don't know or don't necessarily care about, versus making a decision about someone that we know and love. But if you really just break down to the questions or the thing, whatever you want to call it, the issue, the situation, that a decision is needing to be made, I'll always default back to the intention behind the decision, looking at the greed, the anger, the ignorance, looking at the paramitas, right? Is the decision I'm making wise? Is it compassionate? Right? Is it generous? Is it honest? Is it patient? Is the decision best and really looking at myself, or am I making the decision for somebody else? There's a lot of hard questions you have to ask in situations like this. And I think it's helpful if you recognize that whatever decisions you make, to try not to explore, try not to pick it apart too much. Usually we know what the best decision is. Kind of our gut tells us, our instincts tell us. And then our intellect often will get in the way. Very often we know what the best decision is and we're just afraid to do it. We're scared to do it. That fear that we are feeling, that being scared to make the tough decisions, is as much of an attachment to self as anything else is. Right? If you look at the Heart Sutra and it talks about going beyond fear, it's really understanding that there's this heavy, heavy sense of me, mine, my life, this is it. And I'm afraid to make decisions because of how it might impact me and my life, in addition to how it's going to impact others. If you remove this attachment to the self, if you remove this attachment to others, decisions are actually pretty clear if we take fear away. So, just some rambles. I'm pretty positive I didn't give you the most beneficial way to make a tough decision. But my guess is if you just explore, like I said earlier, what your gut is telling you a little bit, and then, when you make decisions, just go with it. Right? I mean, we can second guess ourselves till the end. We all have, I'm sure, been second guessing decisions we've made for years. And very often not making a decision. I know this isn't really your question, but just pointing out this thought that very often this fear of not making a decision is actually a decision in and of itself. Again, not making a decision is a decision. Sometimes we just make a decision and go with it, and don't always worry about whether it's the right or wrong one, the good or bad one. Obviously, we're not talking about harming people. I know, if you have a decision to harm someone or not, then please choose not to harm them. But with things like this and the nature of your question, just make a decision and live with that. We can torture ourselves forever not knowing what to do. So hope that's helpful. Thank you. Good. Glad it helped. And the other thing is, for many people, no matter what decision you make, you're going to end up wishing you did it differently. I hate to say that, but I find that to be very true with a lot of people. And when I say no matter what decision you make, you're going to end up wishing you did it differently, it doesn't mean that the decision you made was wrong. It just means that whatever decision you make, you're just going to constantly be second guessing yourself and wondering if you made the right decision or not. Again, if you remove right and wrong from this conversation and just say, this is my decision and this is what's going to happen, and just play that out. So, I grew up loving to gamble, and I loved roulette. And the kind of the rule around the roulette table was, once you walk away, you don't look back. Because as soon as you look back, you're going to see your numbers that came up, and you're going to wish you stayed one more. So make a decision and move on. That in and of itself is very liberating. Like I said earlier, the torture of what you should or shouldn't do is excruciating. So, all right, Brian, how to practice right effort in a late stage capitalist economy. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think that, again, to sum up briefly, right effort, looking at the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths being the heart of the Buddhist teachings, the first thing he taught, one, life is suffering, dukkha. Doesn't mean all of life sucks. It just means you're going to suffer a lot. The second is the cause of suffering, the greed, anger, and ignorance. The third is the ending of suffering, nirvana, liberation, freedom from suffering. And the fourth is the Eightfold Path. And that's having the correct views, thoughts, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. So I ran through that very quickly. You can Google Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. And if you stay on the first or second page of Google, everything you'll need to know is right there. But I just wanted to give some context to right effort. I think that almost similar to Maurice's question, that the question of how to practice right effort, like just end the question there. I wouldn't put in a late stage capitalist economy. I mean, obviously I understand the nature and intention of your question. But it's like, how to practice compassion. That should be the end of the question. Just practice right effort. Just practice compassion, regardless of where you are. I mean, if I'm looking at right effort, it doesn't matter if I'm in the United States or any other country in the world. Right effort is decisions I make. The diligence. I mean, that's the last thing the Buddha taught. I'm sure you've heard me say this, but before he died, that was the last thing he said when the disciples were concerned he was going to die and they didn't know who was going to teach. And he said, strive on with diligence, be a light unto yourselves. And so really right effort, diligence, we can very quickly, and I'm not saying that you meant this with a question, I'm just rambling a bit, but with this, and for you, Brian, or anybody else, we can very quickly say, like, Buddhism is tough because we're in America, or Buddhism is easier because we are in a different place. It's really not. It doesn't change anything. I've heard people over the years say, like, oh, it must have been easier for the Buddha because he lived 2,500 years ago. Well, again, I would completely disagree with that. I mean, when he lived as a prince, sure, maybe he didn't have the types of things we have today, but whatever he had back then, relative to what was around, he had all of it. So sure, he wasn't sitting there, craving and desiring a bunch of flat screen TVs and, stretch Hummer limos and whatever it might have been. But whatever those things equate to back then, he had it. So it was just as difficult then as it is now. And I think the same thing with, living in this kind of capitalistic country that we're in. I mean, to me, that's just a motivating factor to practice even more so. Yeah, so I think we practice it regardless of where we are. So I hope that's helpful. Other thoughts, questions on anything? Oh, Marley, going back to your question earlier, can you open Buddha for you? The simpler answer is not yet. So we don't have we're hoping it's all soon, but we don't have any announcements as far as when we're going to open yet. So we'll keep you posted, I promise. Brian, you're welcome. Other thoughts, questions? We'll do one more before we wrap up here. Thoughts, questions, meditation, Buddhist practice, anything you're sitting with? Anything else before we wrap up here? All right, so I'll go ahead and close on that. And like I said, as soon as I find that the newsletter from the Zen Center, I will share it with you all. I think it's a really beautiful message and practice for us to remind ourselves of the seriousness of the current situation. All right, so let's go ahead and join palms. May the benefit of this practice be shared with all beings in all directions. May all be at peace. May all be free from suffering. May any merit gained from this practice be transferred to those who need it most. All right, so thanks all for being here. My name is Jeff. I'm a Dharma bum. We opened up the temple 14 years ago to introduce Buddhist practice and meditation to those who show up. So thanks for showing up. We have a full schedule online. We closed, as I mentioned earlier, March 12th, 2020. So it's been shut down for about 14 months. So everything we do is virtual. All the classes, morning meditation, recovery sangha, teen classes, college classes, everything is happening. So just check out the website. The website does have a new calendar. We've gone away from the Google Calendar for now. It actually, I think, looks a little cleaner and easier to use this way. But so we just transitioned everything over to a different calendar format on the website. Other than that, no specific announcements. Again, we're closed. We're still closed. Buddha for You is still closed. You can get anything you want online. If you'd like, as soon as I have any information about when we will open, I will get that to you. I'm just glad that we're talking about when we will open. But let's all remember that we're still very much in a pandemic. Countries are still being shut down. People are still dying. So let's continue to be safe, wear masks, be mindful of the fact that there are others out there that might not be as fortunate as you are or as healthy as you are. So let's keep them in our hearts and minds as well. If you've been vaccinated, great. If you wear a mask, great. But a lot of people aren't in that situation. So let's keep them in mind also. Thanks all for being here. I wish you well, and we'll see you soon.